Hello, everybody. Welcome or welcome back to Tiny Tiger Collective. I'm Helena, and this is my corner of YouTube where I love talking about stationery, journaling, planners, and all the ways in which they help us lead a more intentional life. This week, I wanted to bring a different kind of video to what I normally speak about. Not to discuss anything in particular about my journals or my books, but I wanted to take a moment to zoom out and reflect, perhaps even critically interrogate the consumption practices and culture around stationery and hobbies in general. I was inspired to explore this topic because this past week, Mike from Not Buying It published an incredibly rich, thought provoking, and compassionate video about stationery as a consumption community. And I had the immense privilege of being one of his featured guests, where I contributed to an interview with Mike around my own relationship with stationery consumption and how it has integrated into my life as a hobby. I highly recommend you watch Mike's video, which I will link in the description below. In addition to my own contributions, Mike also features Alison of Little Coco Studio, which I know many of you will know well, Drewscape, and Toby Sketchloose. And I found it so fascinating to hear their perspectives and reflections, in addition to Mike's own journey with stationery as a hobby. Even before Mike reached out to me about contributing to his video, I confess consumption hobbies have been on my mind for quite a while. For the last few months, I've been watching a lot of video essays on YouTube analyzing the role of social media, particularly TikTok, which I'm not on because I'm old, and how it may be contributing to the promotion of certain hobbies as primarily, if not exclusively, a consumptive practice. I was watching one of these videos and it completely shocked me. Things that I take for granted, like coffee or keyboards or gaming, were being exhibited in TikTok and Instagram accounts that completely, unfathomably for me, expanded into the most formidable collections I had ever seen in my life. I know that there are people out there who are very particular about their mechanical keyboard, but this video essay included shots of a content creator who basically had what looked like a walk-in wardrobe of mechanical keyboards. I was so naive. I thought if you like mechanical keyboards, you will buy one. But there are definitely pockets of these niche hobby communities where the sharing on social media is definitely about the visual spectacle of not showing the one or two things that you like, but the entire room full of products that signal your interest, your passions, and perhaps your status and your wealth in being able to afford to invest in these hobbies to this impressive degree. So I confess, when I was thinking about starting a YouTube channel, one of my biggest trepidations was that I would feel pressured to purchase more stationery than I was comfortable doing. In the 2, 3 years before I started my YouTube account on New Year's Eve 2024, I couldn't help but notice that some of the most popular viral videos and channels were ones in which the creator seemed to be unboxing a new luxury stationery product every week. I did remember a year or two before starting this account, hearing a content creator share quite vulnerably their fatigue with creating content for their YouTube channel. And one of the things that they confessed in their video was how they realized that every time they did an unboxing, their views would skyrocket. And when they tried to produce videos around plan with me or let me talk about my week or how I'm prioritizing my goals, my activities, then their views would plummet. And so they felt like they were on this constant content creation treadmill. And that one comment, which I confess, I don't even remember who shared that comment. It was from so long ago. It stayed with me ever since. The major reason why I didn't start a stationary YouTube channel any sooner than I did was because of that comment. One of the ways I was emboldened to start my channel anyway was because by the end of 2024, I had started to see a bit of what I see as a positive shift away from unboxing videos towards videos that are more mindful and thoughtful. And with content creators out there like Alison of Little Coco Studio, Leanne Likes, even Lau from Kenshin Crafts, who has a very impressive fountain pen collection, the way he talks about how he mindfully adds pens to his collection, that for me signaled that there were ways that I could dip a toe into this community without losing myself or being out of alignment with my values. I now have to say that I find it quite positive that 10 months into making videos on YouTube, my unboxing, like, look at me, I bought a new pen videos, are my worst performing videos. And the ones in which I talk about the things I'm truly passionate about that really light me up, whether it is the daily toddler journal that I keep about my son, or reflecting sociologically around planner communities and consumption practices and cultures. That's what seemed to resonate the most with my audience. And I thank you so much for creating this inspiring and principled space where I get to come on week after week and not have to put on a performance of consumption and accumulation rather than engage in the true substance of what it means to have a stationary hobby. So, what I thought would be really helpful to give this reflection a bit of structure is to choose a framework to systematically think through not just my stationary hobby, but the other hobbies in my life. And I thought the one that would resonate the most to this conversation is Martin Seligman's concept of PERMA-V. Martin Seligman is one of the founding thinkers of positive psychology. And this is one of the most fundamental building blocks of how we currently think about well-being and life satisfaction. Back in 2011, Seligman came up with just the 5 letters PERMA, which stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And later, other scholars have added on an extra letter, whether it's a plus that signals a mixture of health, vitality, optimism, or my favorite, which is simply the letter V to stand for vitality. If you watched my previous video about building a strategic life portfolio, and using strategic thinking to design on your own terms what makes a great life, then you would have seen the resource in which PERMA-V is a vital component of the particular strategic life portfolio exercise. I'm not saying that PERMA-V is the definitive or authoritative model to which we must judge all of our hobbies, our activities, or our life. It is simply the one that popped into my mind that I resonated with as a useful and generative starting point for a more systematic conversation. So let me start by talking through how my hobby around stationery fits into this positive psychology framework. Of course, when I say stationery hobby, I recognize that this is such a varied field. It can encompass people who collage or junk journal. It could include people who draw and paint. And it could also include people who have nothing else other than a ballpoint pen and a cheap exercise book, and they spend every day in that book journaling or writing their morning pages. If you visited my channel before, then you'll know that I'm somewhere in between, having a little taste test of all of those pies. So, primarily, I collect a lot of beautiful notebooks, especially Japanese notebooks, like the Hobonichi or the Traveler's Notebook. Although in recent months, I have expanded into a Filofax rings binder that I use as my commonplace book. And I very recently been gifted this beautiful slim pad rings binder from Me Plus that I am experimenting as an EDC. I do a lot of my life planning digitally. So, a digital calendar, a reminders app are usually how I prefer to organize my life. But I love keeping planners as memory keepers and journals. When I sit down to journal about what my toddler gets up to every day, when I'm writing entries for my commonplace book, when I'm jotting down notes for video ideas in the back of my Hobonichi weeks, all of that elicits positive emotion, joy, calm, inspiration, excitement. I absolutely experience engagement, deep focus, and flow, particularly when I'm engaging in the more creatively expressive parts of the hobby, such as decorating my spreads with stickers or doodles. For most of my life, journaling was a very solitary activity. So I wouldn't say that it had a strong component of relationships and community building. But in the past year, I've been so privileged to connect with a number of journaling clubs and fountain pen meets. And that has deepened the element of relationships for me. In fact, later this week, I am really looking forward to making the long drive to Brisbane and seeing some of those friends at the Pelican Hub meet. I am not sure that my stationery hobby generates that much deeper, wider meaning for me or a sense of purpose. But by having a calm space to reflect on my thoughts and emotions has definitely helped me direct my energies elsewhere in my life in more intentional and meaningful ways. So I say, while it might not directly contribute to a sense of meaning, it definitely enhances my capacity and capabilities in cultivating more meaning in my life overall. I'd say accomplishment is definitely one of the elements in PERMA-V where I wouldn't say journaling and stationery in general contribute strongly towards. I am not really learning or developing a lot of new skills when I'm sitting down to write an entry in my diary, but there are definitely pockets of my stationery practice that does give me a sense of accomplishment. And the one that jumps out at me is indeed the commonplace book that I've started to keep in the last couple of months. Because this is a space where I not only get to do research and explore areas around decolonial theory and praxis, that I'm fascinated by. But the whole practice of building this thoughtfully decorated and constructed rings binder and creating my own custom inserts was one that strongly deepened my learning and therefore my sense of accomplishment. And no, I wouldn't say that for someone who works as an academic in my day job, primarily in front of a computer, except when I'm in the classroom, that sitting down to journal contributes to my vitality. That said, a lot of what I journal about, like the happy memories I'm creating with my son, the adventures that we go on as a family, often inspire me to lead a more active life and say yes to more fun. So, in that sense, it indirectly contributes to vitality. In addition to stationery, I do have a number of other hobbies that I thought would be really interesting to compare with stationery, particularly a conversation around consumption. Closely related to my stationery hobby is this YouTube channel. So much so that I'm not sure they're really divisible, but I have longed to create a YouTube channel for years before I finally took the leap and built Tiny Tiger Collective. And it was only possible because I expressed this longing to my husband. And I confessed to him I was so overwhelmed with the prospect of starting a YouTube channel. I had no idea where to start. And he took on a lot of the really tedious, overwhelming tasks in the beginning, like purchasing for me my phone stand that allows me to shoot these videos, and then purchasing for me a stand for my microphone. He helped me smooth out the path towards building this YouTube channel. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for his support. I admit there are a lot of things about a stationary hobby that elicits more positive emotions than having a YouTube channel. So having a YouTube channel opened me up to, yes, some of the kindest, most generous, inspiring people that I have had the pleasure to connect with, who take the time week after week to share ideas for how I could make more of my journals and journaling practices in the comment section. But it does also open me up to trolling and hate. So in the last couple of months, I've done things like delete YouTube Studio off my devices because I was finding that I was getting so caught up in the comments that I would receive, or even focusing too much on the metrics of, oh, this latest video that I cared so much about is underperforming, that I realized it was having quite a negative impact on my emotions. So I've learned, and I'm continuing to learn, to draw boundaries around my YouTube hobby. What I wasn't expecting was how much engagement I would get out of video editing. I swear time freezes when I'm editing, and almost every week I find myself slipping into the most delicious flow when I'm editing my videos. And I would think literally 10 minutes must have passed, only to look at the clock and realize that I'd been editing for an hour and a half. Video editing, making videos in general, were also things that I had always wanted to learn and grow my skills in. But before I began my YouTube channel, seemed almost like impossible tasks. So it definitely gives me a sense of accomplishment when I play back some of my videos from January and February, and I barely find them watchable now because I've just very gradually built up a richer understanding of editing, speaking, filming. Feel free to disagree with me, but I even look at my thumbnails now and I think they're so much more beautiful than they were back in January and February. Unfortunately, I can't say that my YouTube channel gives me a strong sense of vitality because, again, it's a task that I primarily spend at a desk, whether it's filming or editing. And it certainly doesn't positively contribute to my already very sedentary lifestyle. In fact, quite a lot of my hobbies really add to the musculoskeletal strain that I already put my body through in my day to day lives. So, outside of stationery and this YouTube channel, one of my most enduring hobbies is gaming. I really love video games. And when I was younger, I also played tabletop role playing games. And the beauty of those is really being able to tie into relationships. Even in the last few years of my life, there have been a number of online games that I've gotten into that I get to play with some of my friends from the other side of the world and have that moment where we're connected with our microphones and we're working towards fun, common goals and objectives. And those are the moments that really highlight for me why I need gaming in my life as a hobby. But whenever I've truly invested in gaming in the past few years, I have had back pain, shoulder pain, neck inflammation, and it's taught me that I really can't pursue gaming unless I have really, really strong vitality practices in my life already. So that brings me to the activities that do give me vitality. And I think, again, one of the hobbies that I spend the most time on, even though sometimes I forget it's a hobby, is I love to walk. Since moving here to the Gold Coast over 3 years ago, I've been blessed with a beautiful neighborhood where there are some of the loveliest and safest walking trails compared to when I used to live next to a highway in Sydney. The fumes that I would be breathing in on my walk really detracted from what could have been a mindful and peaceful activity. If you've been on my channel before, then some of you would know that I am a recovering overachiever. And this all came to a head in 2018 when I traveled through Singapore and Malaysia for a month to finalize the writing of my first ever book, which I completed in 6 months. I then went to 3 conferences across Estonia, Finland, and the UK, only to come back for a month and fly back out to Tokyo for yet another conference. And that is when in Tokyo, I suffered a very serious lower back injury. My doctor chalked it up to overwork and stress. And going through the months of acute pain, followed by a year of chronic pain, in which some days I would be woken up at 4 a.m. from the excruciating agony and not even be able to think straight. I would be seeing stars because of how much my back hurt. That I had to completely reevaluate who I was and how I defined my self worth. It was the worst and the best thing to happen to me, to use a cliche. So that experience over 7 years ago now taught me the importance of vitality. And in my recovery process, I had the most incredible physiotherapeutic care. I had an incredible doctor and amazing therapists to help me not just heal my back, but to heal my very sense of self that led to the back injury in the first place. One of the best things that came out of that life crisis was developing a daily walking habit. And now not a single day goes by where I don't take a minimum 30-minute walk. I love to combine walking with some of my other hobbies, although I'm not sure that this is the best idea. In order to cultivate more positive emotion around my stationery and YouTube hobbies, I have decided to completely cut out doom scrolling, especially in the evenings before bed. And this has been going so well for me. But unfortunately, one side effect of this is that I have started to take to watching stationery videos during my walk. So I'm literally walking through some of the most beautiful natural landscapes, and I'm holding my phone like this in my hand and looking down the entire time. Yes, sometimes I can turn it off and just listen to whatever the creator has to share. But as some of you might know in the stationery community, there's a lot of visual demonstration. There's a lot of pen tests and ink swatches. And I find myself having to open up the video every 5 minutes or so to see what they're doing. And I'm afraid I'm going to have that to set boundaries around that as well because it's not been improving my sense of well-being. I'm finding that when I'm walking, it really enhances my satisfaction and my sense of calm and fulfillment if I can truly be mindful. So, one of the things that I've started to do in the past week is I've been challenging myself to note down mentally every bird species I see on my walk. So it forces me to really be observant and present on my walks because I'm noting down silver gull, willy wagtail, little black cormorant, magpie goose. Walking doesn't improve my sense of meaning and accomplishment, but it certainly contributes strongly to the other dimensions, especially when I recognize that so few of my other hobbies contribute to physical health and vitality. I'm lucky I know quite a few people in my local neighborhood who love to walk as well. And some of them I met at birthing classes or through our midwives. And so many of them have toddlers around my son's age. And we've been known to go for long walks together while pushing our prams or holding our toddlers' hands side by side. So, doing more of that will certainly help develop relationships. One of the things that I do allow myself to indulge in on my walks is listening to a good audiobook. Because at the very least, I know I don't have to open up a video to see anything. So I do get to be somewhat present in my natural surrounds, but while also feeding my mind and engaging my intellect. I didn't love reading as a child, but I became quite passionate about reading as a young adult. And for the longest time, I always had a very modest goal of reading 20 books a year. Last year, I discovered the joy of audiobooks, and I realized that my membership to my local library gave me access to both the Libby and the BorrowBox apps, where a treasure trove of audiobooks are available for me to loan. Last year, I was spending a lot of time in the dark, whether I was soothing my son and patting him to sleep or rocking him in a rocking chair. And he went through quite a number of sleep regressions where every single night it would take 45 minutes or more before he would fall asleep. And I found that in those evenings, I could listen to an audiobook and get a quarter way through a book just by patting him. And before I knew it, I was reading one book every 3 or 4 days. So last year, I set myself what seemed like an almost impossible goal of reading 100 books. And I am amazed to report that I reached 99 books by November, which meant that I thought for my 100th book, I'm going to read The Count of Monte Cristo. And I actually even calculated how many pages I would need to read every day so that I could finish the book by December the 31st. Audiobooks has certainly been able to help me enhance the vitality of that hobby, where otherwise I might be hunched over on a couch, squinting at the letters. Instead, I get to put on my headphones and go for a long walk around a local park or my neighborhood while listening along to a book. It's also been a wonderful companion for long commutes to work and back. And when I choose books that expand my horizons, that teach me about the world, it greatly enhances my sense of meaning and even accomplishment. I so wish I was part of a local book club so that I could say my reading hobby also helps me deepen my relationships. Alas, I haven't been fortunate enough to find a group of book lovers here in my local city, but I really hope that that's an aspect of my hobby in reading that I'll be able to deepen. So far, I've shared with you, in addition to stationery, a range of hobbies that I pretty much do for free. As I mentioned, every single one of the books that I read, I borrow from the library. I'm also very lucky that because of my job as a university professor, when there are academic books that I'm interested in reading, I'm usually able to either borrow that from my university library or I have the option of requesting it as a book for my library to purchase. And I dare say I have single handedly helped expand our library's collection quite a lot this past year. At the moment, I am reading Sarah Ahmed's The Feminist Killjoy Handbook that my library kindly purchased for me at my request. If you think stationery is my most consumptive hobby, you would be wrong. My husband and I really, really love to eat. And when I look back on the last 10 years of our lives, I will easily say that the amount of money that I have spent on eating at restaurants far, far, far outweighs all of the money I have ever spent on stationery, fountain pens, inks, luxury leather bound books tenfold. Of course, food might be even bigger than stationery as a hobby. And I get that some people, if food is their hobby, what they mean is they love to cook. And I have dabbled in baking as an aspect of my hobby. But for us, the biggest component of our food hobby, if you could call it that, is we love traveling the world for food and we love going to fine dining restaurants. In fact, I have a Notion database in which I keep track of all the Michelin stars that I've collected across my life. But when I think about fine dining, yes, it gives me positive emotions, especially while I'm eating or soaking in the surrounds of a stunning restaurant. I feel a sense of engagement when I am deeply immersed in tasting food. When I go to fine dining restaurants with my husband, that certainly deepens and strengthens our relationship. But I can definitely say, hand on heart, that eating at fancy restaurants contributes very little, if anything at all, to a sense of a deeper meaning or purpose. I can't say I feel any sense of accomplishment when I'm eating. And while fine dining may not be necessarily the most unhealthy things I could put in my body, I wouldn't say that it contributes to my vitality. There are times when I've traveled for food that I do think lends itself to a little bit more enhancement in the meaning, accomplishment, and vitality dimensions of the PERMA-V model. A few years back, my husband and I went with our friends to a Ramadan night market. And there we explored foods, Middle Eastern foods that I've never had before, while building community with our neighbors, with our friends, and hearing them talk about their faith. And for me, it connected to a deeper thread of togetherness, diversity, belonging, and mutual respect. And that was a moment where I could see food as a bridge across cultures and communities in a way that I can admit I don't experience when I'm having a date night with my husband at a fancy restaurant. I don't talk about these hobbies very much on my channel, but in the aftermath of me recovering from my back injury in 2018, one of the reckonings I faced was how I had given up my whole life to work and career. And I had very, very few hobbies at that stage, outside of gaming, I'd say, which definitely didn't help my back situation. So I found out that there was an art studio a short walk from my work, and I signed up to do pottery classes for about a year. There, I met some of the most generous and inspiring potters and pottery teachers. And I pretty much signed up for every single teacher who taught classes at that studio, from a young man who specialized in hand building pottery and the most incredible sculptures, to a woman who was so skilled at throwing and turning, and to a living legend in the Western Australian pottery space, whose glazing techniques were some of the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And to this date, I regret not taking him up on his offer to visit him in Perth to do an actual workshop with him in a traditionally hand fired kiln. Unfortunately, when COVID came around, the art studio cancelled all of their classes in the middle of a term. And so some of the best pots that I had made to date all had to be thrown out because we were no longer able to meet up in person and finish turning and glazing them. Before the art studio reopened, I moved up here to the Gold Coast, and I confess I haven't found any pottery studios that are accessible enough for me to attend weekly classes and reignite this latent hobby. But every year, as my son gets easier and more independent, I dream about the day where the right teacher comes along and I can resume my practice in pottery. I threw away all my pots before I came up to the Gold Coast, but if I can find a few old pictures of the wobbly pots that I made in my phone, I'll insert them in this video. My pottery elicits positive emotion, engagement. One of the things that used to happen to me was when I was throwing my pots on the wheel, I was so lost in the hypnotic swirl of creating my bowls, my vases, that I would often look up from the wheel when my pot was done, and I would see every single student and teacher looking at me with giant smirks on their face because apparently the teacher had been speaking to me or asking me questions, and I was utterly lost to the world. So, to date, even more so than editing, I've never been able to find flow in any other activity more than making pots on a wheel. I met some of the loveliest people in my classes, even though it may not be the most social of activities. As I said, I'm usually lost on the wheel. Whenever we're washing up, scrubbing clay off of our clothes out of our tours, those were some of the happiest conversations that I ever had. My pots certainly weren't anywhere close to changing the world, but in terms of pursuing mastery of a craft, of making things with my hands, there was definitely an element of meaning and purpose there for me in a way that I don't necessarily experience with journaling. It was certainly an exercise in accomplishment, although I dare say spending hours hunched over a wheel did not do wonders for my back, but because it fulfilled so many other elements of my life satisfaction and well being, I'd say overall it had a positive effect on my life. My last hobby is perfume. I love fragrances and the art of creating perfume as much as I love bottles of lovely smelling perfumes themselves. In fact, some of my interests in perfume relate to historical ingredients and processes. The history of it fascinates me much, much more than going to a department store and smelling bottles. But often for me, a good afternoon to rest and restore might involve going into a boutique and spritzing a new creation from one of my favorite perfumers. It is my love of perfume that shocked me the most when I discovered that on YouTube and other social media platforms, there are perfume content creators who own collections of perfumes that will easily outstrip even the biggest department stores in my local city. For me, I love perfumes, which means that I spend a lot of time researching perfumes and perfumers. And I have found one scent that I love, which is Hermès, Un Jardin après la Mousson. And that is the one bottle of perfume that I own. I found it so eye opening when I discovered that perfume could be a consumption hobby or consumption community. Compared to my other hobbies, perfume would be one that I say, other than positive emotion, I can't tell you that it links to any of the other aspects of PERMA-V's model. So, in that sense, like fine dining, it is almost purely a hedonic or hedonistic activity, rather one that generates true connection, purpose, and meaning. I so enjoyed sharing this little reflection about my hobbies, but I'm more interested in learning about your hobbies and your relationship with consumption communities. As I said, I am so proud of the incredible essay and analysis that Mike from Not Buying It produced, and I highly recommend you check out his video if you haven't already. But if you care to share, I would love to hear in the comments below, what are your hobbies and how do they fulfill or not fulfill the 6 dimensions of the positive psychology PERMA-V model? I completely respect if you're not in the mood to analyze your hobbies, because we certainly have to hold some activity in our life sacred and protected from scrutiny or optimization. So if you just like to list out your hobbies other than stationery, I presume, I would love to hear a little insight into the other dimensions of your life and your world. Thank you so much for being here with me this week. I look forward to seeing you in my next video. But for now, take good care of yourselves and bye-bye. I found it so staggeringly